Hello, welcome to another GM Tips. GM Rick here. I'm doing two back-to-back in 1 week. Getting back to my norm. This GM Tips is going to be discussing branching storylines and nonlinear gameplay. And what do you mean by nonlinear gameplay? Well, linear gameplay is sometimes often considered as A plus B equals C type of role play. So, your plot says if you do A and you add B, then you will get to C in the story. It is a sequence that you have played out in a lot of adventure paths. So, say like a dungeon or an adventure path will have a linear type of story that takes you one direction, and that direction is the only direction you can go. And every direction you try to branch off takes you right back to that linear direction. So, I guess some people call it railroading. It can be, where everything forces you back to the main storyline, and no matter what you do, it forces you back into that set storyline. So we're going to look at the ability to branch off. Again, this is out of Kobold Press's Guide to Plots and Campaigns. Ree Soesbee is the author of this, and I like what Ree has had to say. And again, this is Rick's take on it as well. Not just Ree's, but Rick's. As I go through this, I look at this too because I'll be honest, I love branching storylines in non-linear play. I used to want to force players into the linear mode of play. And this was several years ago, probably about 8, 10 years ago. I was in that mindset you have to force them back. As I got into my 40s, I got to learn that, you know what? Stories are more fun when you let the players guide them. Again, you can always bring them back to point C if you need to. But let them go off on some tangents. Let them go some other directions. In fact, my next campaign that I'm going to do, which is loosely around the Mummy's Mask in Pathfinder, is going to be very much branching storylines and nonlinear play. They're in the desert. They're in what is Egypt, in a later era past the pyramids, and yet still in fantasy and in medieval setting. So I'm going to take them some interesting places and allow them to branch off directions that they want to go and build their own story. Too often I have had some branching things, but it always takes you back to the main point. I'm going to move away from that. And why is that? Because interactive storytelling is more fun. Honestly, it is much more branching and nonlinear than the GM just taking you some direction. And as you get better at your gameplay, DMs and GMs, you're going to be much more open to taking people and let them branch off their own directions and follow their own stories or their own conscience of where they want to go. It's much more fun that way. It builds a story that is so memorable for your characters and so relatable that it's unbelievable. And here, as Ree says, interactive storytelling, such as used in RPGs, LARPs, and even video games, offer multiple choices to the player, multiple directions. If you choose this way, you go this direction. If you choose this way, you go that direction. If you choose the third way, you go an alternate direction altogether. It all stays to the main plot, but it's different ways of getting there. Um, and by accepting and acting on these choices, the player assists in crafting a personalized story. That's something as GMs that we've got to get, in my mind, much better at. Allow your players to do their story. That's what's the most fun to the player, because then it's their story they're writing and not your story that you're forcing their character into. Um, the challenge lies not with the player, but with us, the GM or the DM, who must keep pace with all the choices the players make and the choices they didn't make. The best way to be properly prepared is not to map out every possible option that a player might take, but instead to create a living world full of realized NPCs who have their own goals, perceptions, and motivations. Nonlinear games rely on strong subplots, particularly through NPC motivation and setting, um, or world realism. You might not know in advance how the player is going to choose to throw a rock off a cliff, but you do know how gravity works and can quickly adapt to the situation. There is no right way to interact, and there is no right choice for the player to make, though there might be a moral one. There is only player action and world reaction combining to create change and sometimes narrative momentum. what are they? What is Ree saying with all that? Basically, you know the dynamics of the system and the dynamics of what these choices results can be, knowing on the world truisms. So maybe it's the science of the world, the thoughts of how people would react to such a comment or a way a player would do something, and from that you build the plot and the storyline. You may have an overall plot. Hey, the country wants you, like I'm going to do in Australia, the country wants you to find treasures, and the more treasures you find and the more amazing they are, the more powerful it will be. And the great part about it is players have choices to either go on an adventure path, a dungeon, or somewhere altogether different. But you, the GM, have plotted out enough of the story that if they make the choice, you can follow them and help them through their choices. But it's their story. They're writing it. The plot may not be clear overall, other than it's an overriding plot of, hey, go find treasure and turn it in, and from that benefit and your own goals. Otherwise, how you do it and what you do is up to you. And I love that. Um, Yeah, and I love Reed did the same thing, and I love it. I said the A to B to C. I didn't even read this section on the linear stories, but she did exactly what I said. The linear stories are straightforward. The plot and action move from A to B to C. See, Reed, we think on the same mindset if you ever watch this. Um, it's funny how that is. Linear is linear. You're going from one point to another. Branching stories take you off on subpaths. Reminds me of Robert Frost. You guys ever read the Robert Frost one, The Path Less Taken? And he talks about how he looked at a branch in two paths. One was well trodden and taken very often. The other, not so much. It was trodden enough, but not a lot. And he knows what would have happened had he followed the A to B to C path. Instead, he branched off into the other path that wasn't linear, and from it became a better man and was more benefited from it. Sometimes taking that path that is not as well worn is the one the players can take, and it's more interesting when they do. Branching stories allow you, it has a cause and effect to it. But other than that, it changes the storyline drastically. You remember the video game Fable? I love Fable because Fable lets you choose your hero's path. And the hero could be black or white in the beginning, but then there were shades of gray that they could take along the way. The same with what was it? Dragon Age. Dragon Age was like that too. You could go one linear direction, but you didn't have to. There were so many choices that could take you non-linear directions and cause you to lose NPCs that would have been your friends and pick up other NPCs that weren't meant to be your friends. It allowed you your choice. So, story branching, it basically allows your players to write the story. I think that for my players is the coolest aspect because they've been so long taken on paths. Now, they've taken other paths that I've given them. And they love the branching paths. So this next one, I'm going to allow them a lot of branching to go different directions. There's going to be enough plot there that will allow them to take a direction, but who their ally is doesn't matter. I love Pathfinder's Serpent Skull because it's very much like this with the branching stories. There's an overlying thing that they have to do at the end, but the branching stories and who they ally with change their stories drastically and can change the world definitively. But there was no one set way to go. Did you want to help the Pathfinders? Do you want to help the Aspis Consortium? Do you want to help the Shackle Pirates? Do you want to help the colony of Saragava? Do you want to help the Chelish Empire? What path do you want to take? And from it, you'll develop your story, but it's branching and it can go any direction. Um, Sometimes the small choices have large results, as Reese says. Let's say the adventure du jour is as simple as the character finds an abandoned orc child. After appropriate research and preparation, you expect three possible outcomes from the player characters. 1, the character leaves York Child to its fate. 2, the character kills York. Or 3, the character takes York Child to the nearest temple and leaves it on the steps. But what if the player decides to use magic to make the York Child appear human? Or the character adopts the child? See, there's your three linear paths that you plotted out for them. But there's two more you didn't. And that's the fun of it. What if they do adopt the York Child and raise it? And raise it to be a lot like a paladin or a knight or a ninja. Boy, what an unexpected turn for an orc child, right? Orcs normally don't take those paths. But because of the human or the elf or the halfling or the gnome interacting with it, its fate is different now. And the story's different. And what a cool thought. Raising the child. That's like one of my players decided to take the hide of the dragon that they killed and has now developed it into a special armor. I had some fun giving it the abilities. I didn't have to, but because they're mythic now, I gave him a little bit of a twist to it than I would have had he done it earlier. Sometimes the choices lead to better things. Sometimes they lead to worse things. But at the end of the day, they're writing their own story. GMs, this is where you truly show your craftsmanship, when you allow them to write that story. Right, Bug? Yeah, she agrees. See, listen to the mini GM. Listen to the mini GM. She is wise. Um, you can't prepare for every possibility as a GM. We want to. And I've said before, prepare. Well, yeah, but you can't deal with every eventuality. There's more things that you can do. And they can do than you know. And the hardest part is, how do you prepare for these eventualities? You don't. But give the players the agency and means that the players invest in their characters' actions. If the characters' actions cause a plague, the characters tend to feel responsible, therefore interested in the situation. But what if they create a whole new disease? One that was not heard of, or a whole new curse that impacts a town that they didn't expect to do? Well, okay, say like in Mummy's Mask, they go into a tomb that I didn't expect them to, and it releases a curse upon the area. Now you have a whole new investment by the players that maybe they weren't invested in the initial story, but because they did this, holy crap, now they're very invested because this could affect their lives and the livelihoods of the local community they're a part of. Amazing how that works, right? So I like these types of branchings, and she lays them out, and they're really good. The web, the multi-terminus, and the sandbox. The web is the most common one. And the web I kind of like, because the players make different choices leaping from strand to strand, but eventually the path leads to that distinct center vortex. That's what I've used with Reign of Winter. They've leapt from strand to strand differently. They've caused things that went way different than they ever expected. But in the end, it takes them right back to that Matryoshka doll and Baba Yaga and saving Baba Yaga. So that's one way of dealing with it. The multi-terminus is a more dynamic form, and this is one I hope to try with the new campaign. Um, the dynamic form of branching allows the player's actions to have a full impact, to change not only the individual story point where the action takes place, but also to change the outcome of the story as a whole. So instead of leading them to that same point, now by choosing a different choice can change the whole ending of the story. So the ending will not possibly end as it was written in the books. It will end a different way. And yes, if they'd have chosen the A to B to C approach, it would have happened as it was written. But now, because they chose a different branch, now this whole story's ending totally evolves. So, let me give you an example. And again, Ree puts this in here. It's a great example. A wizard's familiar has gone missing. The players might choose to ignore the plot thread and start searching for the familiar immediately to put the matter temporarily on hold while they attend other tasks or any other of innumerable options. So, okay, the familiar went missing, but because there's a timeline that would have saved that familiar, now things have gone wonky. However, until the familiar is found by the characters, it will remain missing. And the wizard who owns it will still retain the information critical to the player's story. If the players retrieve the familiar quickly, the wizard is grateful and offers to grant the players a spell scroll that might have been important on their ongoing quest. The players delay the search. The wizard is thankful, but does not give the additional bonus information that would have been critical to solving the story. I like that. It's an interesting way of putting it. But if the players would have done what they were supposed to do, everything works as it's supposed to. Because they didn't, it changes the whole possible outcome. Because maybe that missing information was critical. And now they're missing it. Now they can't solve it the way they were supposed to. And they've got to come up with a whole other way and a whole other way of ending things. Maybe similar manner, but it's not the same. Then there's the sandbox, which a lot of GMs do this, and you'll hear the referral of sandbox a ton. In a sandbox gameplay, you do not create an overarching story at all, but instead invent fully realized world with complex and motivated NPCs. Basically, you just make the structure around them, and they choose where they're going to go. And it is fully designed by the motivations of the PCs, nothing to do with an overarching plot. Sandbox can be quite fun. It allows you to be creative and take the players 9 different directions. They still impact the world. They still write a story. It still changes the overall history of that world, but not in a way that's set. There is no set bad guy. There is no set place to go. There is no set overarching plot. It is just let them go, and each week they go, they take a different direction. You, the GM, take them that way and let it evolve. Another way I may take this Mummy's Mask one. Now, running a branching game, and this is really key when it comes to this, and I'm going to share what she has to say because it falls in line with my thinking, totally. When a story suddenly takes a left turn, you have a lot of options to keep the game on track, GM and DM, or in genre, or roughly consistent with your world's premise. After all, it's one thing for a story to zigzag based on a player's interactions with other NPCs and PCs, or entirely another for a well-designed world to be turned on its face because the players found a loophole in the plot rules and motivations. Although a nonlinear game allows players greater freedom, it is more difficult for a GM to manage, and it is. We have to be constantly adapting to what their choices are. Plots can fall by the wayside, and game can feel undirect or even sparse at times because of it. However, a certain amount of branching is possible and necessary for gameplay to feel alive. Players need to feel invested. You can most easily accomplish that by allowing them the free will to make choices and then showing that those choices have solid impact on the world and an overall storyline. And I think that's really the key. I love Sandbox, but Sandbox to me can get very sparse, very thin. I think the branching path is much easier to manage because you do have an overall plot, but it's affected by each choice of the characters. A fully sandbox game can lose direction and feel aimless, as many of you have probably experienced. After a while, it's like, where are we wandering to? What is our purpose? And even the players get that after a while. It's like, okay, this is fun, but I just feel lost. A branching storyline still keeps them to an overall plot as a whole, but allows them to create and fill in the tapestry as they go along. And each choice you can play that thing 1,000 different times with 1,000 different outcomes at the end. It's all the same, leads to the same point, the same nexus point as a whole, but that nexus point changes a little bit and evolves. So even that nexus point, even though it has a plot that leads you to there, how that nexus point looks is very different each time with each set of choices. Um, the biggest challenge for you as a GM is fully formed NPCs. You can't have these two-dimensional NPCs. You have to have NPCs that are fully well set, and you have to give them purpose and motivation, and the ability to interact with players with real purpose. So it's as if, as a GM, you're running these NPCs as PCs with their own motivations and things. And that's where you have to really invest into this. I'm not saying you make 50 of them, but maybe you make 15 fully vetted NPCs. And then you have other two-dimensional ones that you can easily transform into 3D if the players go that direction. I love the conclusion. Limiting player choice limits player investment. You never want to limit your players' choices. You want to give them a lot of free will. But a solid world, build a solid world, and you can witness stories evolve from player characters interacting with that world. Don't be afraid to drop a pre-planned story in exchange for one that occurs based on the decisions. Maybe you have that story, but if it evolves to a wholly different plot, because maybe that cult doesn't rise as it should have. Maybe another cult rises in its place. That's where owning books like the Villains Codex and the NPC Codex, like in Pathfinder, comes in handy. Because then you have other villains and other people that can rise if one does not. And the plot can still be the same. You can still have the overarching story, but maybe a different group takes on that role of running that thing. Key thing. As long as events occur naturally, allow the players to shape the world. Players are naturally more invested in stories they choose to unfold, start, or invest in. Excuse me, instigate. Geez, enunciate, Rick. Sorry, guys. Um, the story as you see it may not be the story the players want to tell. Trust your players to make those realistic decisions and encourage them to show you their characters' motivations, long-term plans, fears, and desires. When we do that, we truly let our players realize what they want to build. And that's something that's important in the gameplay. Sometimes we limit our players and they write these wonderful background stories and don't get to ever live them. Let them live them. Let them have these stories. Let them make them their stories. And it will be that much more exciting. All right, folks. So we'll go back to the title of this, and I hope it's helped you on these type of things. And again, great thing with Ree Soesbee. Thank you, Ree, for writing this. I think this has inspired me as a GM for the branching storylines and nonlinear gameplay. Let's have more of that, and let's talk more about that, and share those type of stories, how it worked for you, so other GMs can see that, man, this is a great thing. Again, this is GM Rick with GM Tips. Sorry it's bouncing a little bit. I got a little lap table here. Love you guys. Have a great week.